At 65 years old, Simon Cowell has reached a point in life where truths once hidden are finally beginning to emerge, revelations that many would have preferred to keep locked away behind the scenes, and that now threaten to forever change the way the public sees him. The mogul of musical reality shows, the man who shaped careers and shattered dreams with a single phrase, always cultivated an image of unshakable strength and absolute control. But behind that facade there were secrets, explosive tensions, and controversial decisions that deeply marked his trajectory. From heated disputes behind the scenes of multimillion-dollar shows, to fierce criticism from the public and the press, to personal moments he always tried to keep far from the cameras, every detail of this story reveals a Simon who is more human, more complex, and more vulnerable than the world ever imagined. And today we're going to explore all of that, point by point, with no filters, in a narrative that goes from internal conflicts that almost shook his career to episodes that sparked suspicions, theories, and debates among fans and experts. So before we continue, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because your subscription is what tells YouTube that this content is relevant and deserves to reach more people. That's what keeps the channel alive and allows me to keep bringing deep stories like this one. And if you'd like to support even more, you can help through Super Thanks. Every contribution, no matter how small, makes a huge difference in helping me continue creating high-quality videos. But if you can't contribute financially, that's totally fine. Leave a comment telling me which part of this story surprised you the most. That alone helps the channel grow tremendously. And stay with me until the end, because the final revelation is so unexpected and so impactful that it may forever change the way you see Simon Cowell. The story of Simon Cowell's origins begins long before he became the influential name the world would come to recognize, and understanding his childhood is essential to understanding the personality he would develop over the years. Born on October 7, 1959 in London, Simon grew up in a family environment that blended discipline, creativity, and high expectations. His father, Eric Cowell, worked in the music industry and also had experience in finance, while his mother, Julie Brett, was a charismatic figure active in London's society with a strong aesthetic sense. From an early age, Simon realized he was living between two worlds, the world of artistic sensitivity and the world of professional seriousness, and this combination would shape the direct yet intuitive way he would later interact with people. During childhood, he was not exactly a model student. In fact, he stood out more for his restlessness than for his discipline. He disliked rules that made no sense to him and often questioned teachers, which created an ambiguous reputation. On one hand, he was seen as an intelligent young man full of his own opinions. On the other, he was remembered as someone stubborn, resistant to norms, and not very tolerant of rigid authority. This characteristic of challenging what was expected, something that would later become fundamental to his style on television, was born precisely during this period, when Simon preferred to follow his own logic instead of simply adapting. At home, however, he was a boy who observed everything closely. Although he showed a strong personality, he was also introspective, sensitive, and very close to his mother, who encouraged him to explore creativity and self-confidence. From his father, he inherited a practical outlook, a sense of opportunity, and an understanding that the entertainment world can be as promising as it is unpredictable. These two sides coexisted within him in an almost conflicting way. The emotional Simon who absorbed every criticism as something personal, and the proud Simon who learned to turn those criticisms into fuel. As a teenager, his aversion to the school environment only grew stronger. Simon felt he didn't fit in, not because he lacked ability, but because the traditional model didn't allow the free expression he valued. It was during this period that his personality began to define itself more clearly. Sharp frankness, sarcastic humor, impatience with incompetence, and at the same time, a sensitivity hidden behind an apparently tough posture. He also developed a very keen sense of emotional perception, which he would later use to identify talent, recognize insecurities, and predict audience reactions. Although he had no idea he would one day build a career discovering artists, Simon already displayed this ability long before he had the chance to put into practice. His relationship with his siblings also played a significant role in his development. Within the family dynamic, Simon had to find his own space, and this drove him to develop a kind of independent identity, as if he wanted to prove he didn't need to follow anyone else's path. This pursuit of autonomy would later be reflected in his bold decisions, such as turning down corporate stability to pursue the chaotic world of music and television. Deep down, Simon was always aware that he was different from others, and this feeling, one that could have become a weakness, turned into one of the pillars of his strength. The years of childhood and adolescence not only shaped his temperament, but created the foundation of the persona the world would see decades later. Someone firm, brutally honest, and above all, relentless in defending his own convictions. In the music industry, his first steps were anything but glamorous, and understanding this period is essential to seeing how he built the fame that would come later. After a teenage phase marked by doubts about his own future and conflicts with traditional models of work, Simon entered the recording industry almost by accident, heavily influenced by the fact that his father already had connections with major companies in the field. However, contrary to what many imagine, this did not open magical doors. In fact, the beginning was tough, filled with simple tasks, repetitive routines, and a great deal of silent observation. He started by doing administrative work, often underestimated by colleagues who saw him as nothing more than an opinionated young man with no clear direction. It was in this environment that he learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Talent means nothing without persistence. He watched brilliant people give up when facing difficulties and realized that the real difference was not just knowing what to do, but being able to endure the phases when nothing seemed to work. Immersed in that world, he knew his strength lay in his sharp perception of behaviors, trends, and potential. By observing artists, producers, and executives, Simon began developing the ability to recognize what worked and what was doomed to fail, long before anyone else. This instinct, however, was still not taken seriously. He suggested ideas that were dismissed, pointed out mistakes no one wanted to hear about, and was often labeled difficult, when in reality, he was simply ahead of his time. The series of silent failures began when he tried to create his own projects within the record labels. Some of his bets were poorly received, others never reached the public, and a few pushed him to emotional and financial limits. At one point, Simon found himself essentially back at the beginning, with no money and no prospects, living through a phase many would describe as a total failure. But ironically, it was precisely this stage that strengthened his mindset. Instead of giving up, he decided to learn from each mistake, accumulating practical experience that would later become his greatest advantage. The turning point came when Simon realized his greatest talent wasn't in trying to imitate what the market was already doing, but in identifying what the market had not yet noticed. That's when he began betting on artists and entertainment formats that seemed strange or too risky to other producers. He understood that the audience didn't want only music, they wanted stories, authenticity, and emotion. This thinking would become the foundation of what later transformed Simon Cowell into one of the biggest names in global entertainment. However, success did not come suddenly. Before becoming the sharp-tongued Simon of musical reality shows, he went through discouraging meetings, rejected contracts, artists who criticized him, projects that failed, and ups and downs that shook his confidence. Even so, he kept going, knowing that each failure brought him a little closer to the decisive breakthrough. When the opportunity finally arose to work with formats related to musical competitions, Simon immediately recognized that this was his path. Television allowed him to combine two skills he had been refining since youth, his critical eye for talent and his ability to read human emotion. By combining these qualities with his often brutal honesty, he quickly stood out. Shows like Pop Idol, The X Factor, and Britain's Got Talent not only solidified his name, but also showed the world the direct, precise, and straightforward style of analysis he had been developing since the days when no one believed in his ideas. Thus, Simon Cowell's early steps in the industry were marked by frustrating attempts, bold risks, sleepless nights, and a determination that endured the toughest periods. What seemed like failure was, in reality, the solid foundation of knowledge and resilience that turned him into the icon the public would come to know years later. His personal life has always been surrounded by curiosity, speculation, and a mix of admiration and bewilderment from the public. For many years, he maintained the image of a confirmed bachelor, a man too busy for deep relationships and constantly consumed by professional commitments that seemed to leave little room for any lasting emotional bond. But behind this appearance of absolute independence, there was a much more complex Simon, someone who, from an early age, dealt with internal conflicts related to emotional vulnerability, the fear of disappointing others, and the constant need to prove he had everything under control. For decades, Simon preferred to engage in short relationships, some discreet, others that eventually drew media attention. He had difficulty opening up, fully trusting, and allowing anyone to cross his internal barriers. It was not uncommon for him to keep people at a safe distance, not because he didn't care, but because he had grown used to the idea that exposing his emotions could be seen as weakness in an environment as competitive as entertainment. This behavior even created mistaken impressions, leading some to believe Simon was cold or indifferent, when in reality, he carried fears and insecurities he hid almost automatically. The absence of deep emotional bonds also stemmed from his intense lifestyle. Working long hours, traveling constantly, facing results-driven pressure and daily criticism, he ended up prioritizing work without realizing how much it distanced him from a balanced personal life. In old interviews, he even admitted that for many years he believed it was impossible to reconcile his professional routine with a stable relationship, and this led him to a kind of acceptance, the belief that he might be destined to live alone and focus solely on his career. However, everything began to change when Lauren Silverman entered his life. Their relationship marked a decisive turning point in Simon's personal journey, not only because of the external shift the public could see, but mainly because of the internal changes he had to face. Lauren appeared at a moment when Simon already carried success, influence, and power, but still held emotional gaps he tried to ignore. Their relationship did not begin in a traditional way. It started in a complex context and generated massive media attention, forcing Simon to deal with criticism, judgment, and unexpected pressure. Even so, it was precisely the intensity of that beginning that made him rethink who he was and what he truly wanted from life. Lauren brought something Simon had not found in a long time: emotional stability. Unlike the competitive environment he was accustomed to, the relationship offered space for vulnerability, conversation, and personal growth. Little by little, he began allowing himself to feel, to share, to let his guard down, and to acknowledge needs he had suppressed for years. One of the most symbolic moments of this transformation was the birth of their son, Eric. Fatherhood impacted him deeply, not only because it represented a new responsibility, but because it awakened a sensitivity buried since his youth. Simon had always had a significant relationship with his parents, and when he became a father, he realized that some of the insecurities he carried came from the expectations he grew up trying to meet. Now, with his own son, he wanted to do things differently, be present, be loving, be someone the boy could trust. Eric's arrival completely reorganized his priorities. The relentless mogul began reducing travel, adjusting his routines, and seeking balance between family and work. Lauren played an essential role in this process, acting as a bridge between the public Simon and the private Simon, helping him find emotional harmony and develop a new relationship with his own ego, one less tied to the need for perfection and more connected to authenticity. Even so, his internal conflicts did not vanish completely. Simon remains someone demanding of himself, someone who struggles to express certain insecurities, and who sometimes finds it difficult to balance his controlling nature with his emotional life. However, Lauren brought softness, understanding, and the ability to show him that personal life can be just as rewarding as any professional achievement. Throughout his career, Simon has always displayed a peculiar relationship with the press, marked by raw honesty, strong opinions, and a communication style that blends humor, toughness, and an unexpected touch of vulnerability when least expected. It is precisely in this collection of revealing interviews, spread over decades, that we can see a more human, contradictory, and candid Simon. Someone unafraid to admit mistakes, make surprising confessions, or comment on controversial episodes that still fuel debates among fans, critics, and industry professionals. Over time, these statements became an essential part of how he shaped his public image, and also a form of expression in itself. One of his most surprising interviews occurred when he revealed that, for many years, he believed his work style was the only possible path to achieving extraordinary results. However, he confessed that he eventually realized this mentality distanced him from important people and made him overlook the emotional exhaustion he was experiencing. Simon mentioned an especially difficult period in which he felt professionally in control of everything, yet emotionally misaligned, as if he had lost the ability to relax or recognize his own limits. Speaking about this, he emphasized that learning to listen to himself and change his approach was a long but necessary process, and that additions like fatherhood were decisive in this internal transformation. Among his most talked about controversial statements are those related to behind-the-scenes dynamics on talent shows. Simon has often commented that there were tense moments between judges, disagreements with producers, and creative disputes that nearly jeopardized certain projects. Although he never provided sensationalist details, he admitted that behind the cameras, there were intense disagreements over contestant choices, editing decisions, and even the artistic direction of entire seasons. In one particularly revealing interview, he said that television hides more conflict than the public imagines, and that keeping a show on the air involves as much diplomacy as creativity. Despite these tensions, Simon ensured that he learned to appreciate the complexity of these environments, recognizing that major productions always carry heated debates, and that, in the end, this is part of creating something great. A recurring topic in his interviews is his initial difficulty dealing with criticism. Despite his reputation as confident and relentless, Simon admitted that negative comments about his work, his style, or his decisions affected him deeply behind the scenes. He said that, for years, he pretended these opinions didn't matter, but inside, he felt pressure to meet expectations he couldn't always fulfill. By revealing this, Simon surprised many fans who believed he was immune to public opinion. This honesty allowed the public to see a much more human and vulnerable side of him, showing that even someone who judges others harshly carries intimate insecurities that the cameras never reveal. Another striking revelation came when he decided to talk about his health and lifestyle. One of his most impactful confessions was that he reached a point where he realized he was living at the limit and urgently needed to rethink his priorities. This realization led to deep lifestyle changes, including adjustments in his diet, daily routine, and the way he balanced work and family time. His statements about professional regrets also drew attention. Simon admitted he made mistakes in evaluating artists who later became major names in music and acknowledged that his judgment was not always perfect. He mentioned cases in which he rejected talents who later gained prominence, saying this taught him never to underestimate anyone, and that the industry is unpredictable, full of surprises and sudden turns. He also confessed that even though his instinct was strong, there were moments when the pressure of the format or the need to make quick decisions led him to rushed conclusions. By discussing this, Simon showed humility in admitting that even the most experienced critic can be wrong, and that these mistakes are part of learning. On a personal level, Simon also surprised audiences by talking about his emotional growth. In more recent interviews, he spoke openly about how his relationship with Lauren Silverman and the birth of his son transformed the way he sees life. He explained that before that, he lived at such a fast pace that he barely had time to reflect on his feelings or choices. Lauren, he said, brought balance, understanding, and a new perspective on what truly matters. In a more intimate conversation, Simon stated that his family became the anchor he had been searching for many years without realizing it. This declaration moved fans and showed how much he has grown emotionally, leaving behind the role of the tough businessman and embracing his affectionate, family-oriented side more naturally. Another frequent subject in his interviews is the impact television has had on his private life. Simon acknowledged that for many years, he practically lived inside studios, leaving little room to develop hobbies, moments of rest, or deeper personal connections. He commented that looking back, he realizes he allowed himself to be consumed by work, and that although he loves what he does, he learned that there are limits that must be respected. This self-awareness is one of his most important revelations, as it shows that even someone so entrenched at the top of the industry had to reassess his priorities to find balance. Additionally, Simon sparked discussions by revealing that behind his confident appearance lies an introspective side few people know. He shared that, especially early in his career, he struggled to feel comfortable in public, and that his critical tone sometimes functioned as a form of protection. He said his extreme frankness was a way to avoid exposing himself emotionally, and that, over time, he learned to express himself in a more balanced way, although his direct style remains one of his strongest trademarks. In some light-hearted interviews, Simon also made controversial remarks about the direction of the music industry. He spoke about how certain styles are overused, criticized corporate decisions that prioritize profit over authenticity, and argued that many artists lose their identity by trying to please everyone. These comments fueled heated debates among professionals and fans, but they also showed that Simon remains attentive to what is happening around him, defending his vision even when it goes against the majority opinion. However, throughout his career, Simon faced a series of difficult moments that, despite often remaining hidden beneath his public image of absolute confidence and sarcastic humor, had a profound impact on his personal and professional life, shaping not only his posture toward the media, but also the way he sees himself, his work, and the relationships around him. Although he is internationally recognized as one of the biggest names in the entertainment industry, responsible for turning shows such as The X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, and America's Got Talent into global phenomena, Simon has always dealt with intense internal pressures, harsh criticism, and unexpected challenges that, over time, revealed a much more vulnerable and human side than the one the public was used to seeing. One of the first major challenges came at the height of his fame, when his role as the main judge began to be analyzed not only for the content of his critiques, but also for the emotional impact his words could have on participants. For many years, Simon was described as too harsh, relentless, cold, or even humiliating, especially during the early phase of his television career, when his personal trademark was sharp sarcasm and brutal honesty. Although this style helped build his fame, it also brought fierce backlash, some from media experts and others from fans who believed Simon crossed emotional boundaries. He has admitted that for a certain period, he did not care much about people's reactions because he believed his job was to say exactly what he thought. However, over time, he realized that there was a delicate line between being sincere and deeply hurting someone, especially young artists placing their dreams into those few minutes on stage. This realization began to change as Simon matured, lived significant personal experiences, and went through moments that made him rethink his role in the entertainment world. However, the criticism did not stop at his judging style. When some shows experienced drops in ratings or controversial creative decisions, Simon was singled out as the one to blame, facing harsh headlines that turned his king of television image into an easy target for the tabloid press. At many points, tense behind-the-scenes moments and debates over judge hires, format changes, and rejected collaborations created even more pressure, leading Simon to cope with sleepless nights and intense internal expectations. But among all the difficult moments in his journey, none had as much impact as the accidents he experienced in recent years. The first major scare occurred during a serious electric bike accident that resulted in significant spinal fractures and left him temporarily unable to walk. For someone who had always lived fueled by intensity, routine, a packed agenda, and a constant need to stay in control, the period of immobility was devastating. Simon had to go through delicate surgeries and an extremely painful recovery process that required not only intensive physical care, but also an emotional strength he admitted he never imagined he would need. This event deeply marked his life and changed the way he viewed his own body, his health, and his priorities. For months, he remained away from recordings, removed from his responsibilities and from public life, which forced him to confront feelings of fragility and fear that he had rarely experienced before. The accident also exposed another layer of pressure, the public expectation that he would always be strong, always confident, always capable of continuing to work. While many fans prayed for his recovery, other media outlets fueled sensationalist narratives about his condition, his physical appearance, and even his professional future. It was during this period that Simon realized how vulnerable he was and how much he had ignored important signs regarding his physical and emotional limits. The truth is that his life had always been lived at maximum speed, full of commitments, decisions, travels, and long recordings that demanded almost superhuman energy. Even before the accident, he already faced high levels of stress, social pressure, and expectations impossible to meet. His routine was a constant struggle between the desire to innovate and the need to keep the audience engaged, which frequently placed him under extreme pressure. Even so, it was only after the accidents, including a second electric bike incident, that Simon truly understood he was not invincible and needed to take better care of himself. These moments, although painful, led him to profound transformations. He began reevaluating his relationship with work, his public image, and most importantly, his mental and emotional health. He adopted healthier habits, reduced his intense schedule, and began prioritizing his family, especially his son Eric, who became one of the pillars of his recovery. His relationship with his son was also a crucial point in this process of internal transformation. Simon has stated that seeing the fear and worry in the boy's eyes during his recovery made him realize how important his presence was and how much he needed to be alive, strong, and healthy not only for himself but for those who love him. People close to him say that after these difficult moments, Simon became calmer, more reflective, and much more aware of the impact his choices have on his life and on the people around him. This internal transformation also reflected in his posture as a judge and producer. He began to look at contestants more empathetically, to value their effort, and to balance sincerity with emotional care. His humor is still there, and his authenticity too, but now there is a layer of humanity that was not as evident before. He learned to say no more constructively, to encourage when he sees potential, and to be more sensitive to the stories and challenges each person carries. All of this shows that Simon Cowell, despite his fame and fortune, is not immune to life's ups and downs. Like anyone else, he faces criticism, pressure, insecurities, and losses, but he also has the ability to reinvent himself, learn, and grow. The accidents and internal struggles not only left physical marks, but also opened space for a meaningful transformation. One that made him a more aware, more affectionate, and more connected man to what truly matters. These difficult moments, although painful, ultimately revealed a more mature and human version of Simon Cowell, showing the world that even the most successful people can face deep falls and still find the strength to rise again with more wisdom than before. Today, Simon Cowell is living a phase marked by maturity, introspection, and a new way of relating to fame, very different from the image that defined him publicly for decades. If before he was seen as the relentless television mogul, known for sharp opinions and an almost intimidating presence, now he appears as someone calmer, aware of his own limitations, and deeply connected to his family and to the true meaning behind his choices. Over time, both difficult experiences and grand successes not only shaped his career, but also left emotional marks that led him to rethink his priorities and redefine how he wants to live in the present and build his future. In recent years, Simon has shown a noticeable change in his demeanor, from his behavior on camera to his professional decisions. He has come to value moments of rest, something that barely existed in his once hectic routine, filled with recordings, meetings, and constant travel. Fame, which once served as fuel for his work and validation for his creative choices, now holds a different place in his life. It's no longer the center, but merely a consequence. Those close to him say he has learned to separate the public man from the private one, something that was always difficult for him because so much of his identity was tied to being an influential name in entertainment. The arrival of his son, Eric, remains one of the main reasons behind this internal transformation. Simon has said many times that it was only after becoming a father that he began to see life with deeper meaning and purpose. He became more present at home, more attentive to small, everyday details, and much more aware of the influence he has on his son. Simple activities such as walks in the park, board games, watching cartoons, or following the boy's development now carry an emotional value that surpasses any professional achievement. In many ways, it was this bond that helped him navigate the most challenging moments of his life, especially after his accidents, when he realized that his greatest fear wasn't losing his career, but failing in his role as a father. His relationship with Lauren Silverman has also remained strong, grounded in a new dynamic of respect and mutual support. The partnership, once heavily scrutinized by the media due to controversies and speculation, has become something more discreet and solid, away from the spotlight and centered around the family. Lauren played a crucial role during his recovery, encouraging healthier habits, helping organize his routine, and above all, offering emotional stability during moments of doubt and fragility. This continuous support helps Simon discover a new version of himself, less reactive, more patient, and with a more empathetic view of the people around him. The impact of this maturity also shows in his relationship with work. Simon remains active as a producer and judge, but with a more balanced enthusiasm and a less self-centered approach. He no longer tries to maintain absolute control over everything, and has become more open to delegating, listening to suggestions, allowing new voices to contribute creatively, and recognizing that part of his role today is to guide, inspire, and open doors for emerging talents. This collaborative posture is one of the clearest marks of his calmer and more reflective phase. Furthermore, Simon has become aware of the importance of taking care of his health as a whole. Recovery after his accidents was difficult and long, and it made him understand that his body needed special attention. He adopted more balanced habits with regular exercise, improved eating, and, most importantly, a significant reduction in daily stress. He has admitted that he once believed he could maintain the same work pace for decades, until he realized not only that it was impossible, but also dangerous. Today he seeks to live with more moderation, avoiding overloads and prioritizing activities that bring real well-being, not just external recognition. His relationship with fame has also changed deeply. If before he seemed to depend on it to reinforce his own value, today he views public visibility with lightness and even humor. In interviews, he doesn't hesitate to laugh at himself, comment on changes in his appearance, or reflect on decisions he made when he was younger. For many fans, Simon has become more accessible and human, someone who acknowledges his flaws, admits his mistakes, and speaks openly about his vulnerabilities. In doing so, he dismantles the almost caricature-like image of a villain or harsh critic, revealing a man who, like anyone, went through highs and lows, matured, and found a more balanced path. This maturity is also reflected in the way he sees the future. Simon is no longer concerned with expanding his television empire or creating new formats that dominate ratings. Instead, he thinks about emotional legacies, the people he helped throughout his career, and the time he still wants to spend with his family. He feels more comfortable with a less chaotic routine, appreciates quiet weekends, and recognizes that, even with all the pressure he once carried, now is the time to live with more quality. This doesn't mean Simon has lost his passion for discovering talent or producing shows that move millions of people around the world. He has simply found a balance between work and personal life, something that once seemed unattainable. Today, he works because he loves what he does, not because he feels the need to prove himself or compete with anyone. And that shift is one of the most revealing aspects of his journey. In essence, Simon Cowell is living a more human-centered and conscious phase in which fame is no longer the main engine of his existence. It has given way to a broader understanding of happiness, responsibility, and purpose. His mistakes, successes, challenges, and recoveries have led him to a maturity expressed in every gesture, every decision, and every word. He has become a more complete person not because of the success he achieved, but because of his ability to look at himself and change what needed to be changed. Is this new relationship with life, calmer, more sensitive, and more genuine, that defines who Simon is today, showing that behind the mobile exists a man deeply transformed by the experiences he lived?